Welcome, everybody. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture, the organization that brings you this program, the Parent Education Series, now in its 17th year, founded in Silicon Valley. We are delighted to have with us tonight Eduardo Torres from Prevention Solutions, formerly FCD Prevention. This is a wonderful organization I'm going to tell you about a little bit more, but first of all, I want to say we have with us Kelly Juarez, who will be doing simultaneous Spanish interpretation for us. If you would like to listen in Spanish, please click on the globe icon and then Spanish. Okay, so globe and then Spanish to hear Kaylee and Spanish interpretation. First of all, special thanks to Eduardo Torres, who's here today, zooming in, I think, from Texas. That's where you are, right, Eduardo?
Yes.
And we would like especially also to thank tonight's sponsors, the Woodside High School PTSA, the Sequoia Union High School District, the Sequoia Healthcare District, Peninsula Healthcare District, and this organization, the Parent Venture. We would not be here tonight without your sponsorship and throughout the year, so thank you, thank you. Tonight's format is going to be a typical webinar for our program. That means that Eduardo is going to speak to you for about 40 minutes, but we really want to leave time for questions, especially for this important topic, fentanyl prevention education, how to help teens make healthy decisions. We know that unfortunately overdoses of teens, including educated high school and college students, have been much in the news. So we really wanted to bring you this relevant and timely information before the school year gets out. So again, thank you. We know this is a really important topic. We've had more than 300 registrants, even now, just 2 weeks before the end of school. So quickly, you have two ways to interact with us. One is the chat button, so please do look for resource links in there. My co-founder, Bev Hartman, will be putting in the chat. So comments, resource links. We'd like you to put your questions in the Q&A box. So questions in the Q&A, resource links, and comments in the chat, okay? And then also tonight's event is being video recorded and will be available soon on our video library. Bev will be putting that link in the chat, so do look for it. With more than 55,000 views on our video library, we know that you, parents, educators, students, community members, mental health professionals are really benefiting from the information that we're bringing to you. All right, let me tell you a little bit about tonight's featured presenter. Eduardo Torres is a senior prevention specialist at Prevention Solutions, formerly FCD Prevention Works, which is part of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. Prevention Solutions works around the world to provide students, parents, and families with the knowledge, understanding, and skills they need to make healthy decisions about the use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Fluent in Spanish and American Sign Language, Eduardo joined Prevention Solutions in 2012. He holds a BA in addiction counseling with an emphasis in chemical dependency from Grand Canyon University. Eduardo volunteers for a nonprofit which serves people with severe physical and mental impairments. And interesting fact, he holds a Central American championship in karate. Welcome, Eduardo. We can't wait to hear what you have to say tonight.
Thanks so much, Charlene. And hi, everyone. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone. It's really an honor for me to be doing a parent session in May. It really is a privilege and a joy. It literally, for us at Prevention Solutions, it's the cherry on top of the sundae. The sundae being the entire year that we've worked serving our clients all around the world. To Charlene's point, this is a really interesting topic. So I want to honor the fact that whatever questions you may have, I am going to devote as much time as I possibly can to answer every single doubt that you have related to this incredibly important topic, which is fentanyl. Before we go right into fentanyl, I want to briefly talk a little bit about our organization and what we do. So we're Prevention Solutions. We're a private nonprofit organization. We work in about 71 different countries, and we've served over 2.5 million students. And also we've surveyed about 130,000 students. We're a small part of the larger Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, which is a premium top substance abuse provider amongst across the United States is the word that I was looking for. I want to also briefly describe prevention and what it does mean when we go in and we have a preventative talk, especially with parents. So many prevention models have been ongoing insofar as treatment, as substance use and abuse pertains. Unfortunately, many of them have failed because one of the things that they failed to do is, first and foremost, not put this as a moral issue. Sometimes they use very binary terms of like, this is really bad, or this is really good, or this or that. When we were trained, one of the things that we are very conscious of is that prevention does not necessarily mean telling kids to not to do this or to do that, but rather empowering them with the right information that's evidence-based. It's not an anecdote, it's not a personal opinion, but rather it comes from the evidence, it comes from science. To hopefully empower them to continue making healthy choices, or if they're using or maybe potentially using, for them to have a little bit of dissonance to question their decision-making process. We also denormalize high use. Unfortunately, what you see today in the media is a microcosm that basically forms false normative beliefs insofar as how high use really is. So prevention is really substituting cultural, social norms with health-based language so that hopefully our young people can live a healthier life. We directly talk to young people because we know that they're the segment of the population that's most vulnerable to addiction. And the reason being, and it's very simple, no matter where we are in the world, this is our universal passport, is that their brains are still not yet 100% fully developed. Furthermore, prevention's main message is not synonymous with prohibition, but rather with, it's in your best interest to try to potentially delay the use of any sort of mood altering substance so that you let your brain properly develop, and then you're able to make a decision. But let it properly develop as a way to mitigate one's susceptibility or probability of becoming chemically dependent. So that's one of the main reasons why we're here. However, the second big reason as to why we're here is to also talk about fentanyl. The reason why this is so important and it's on every major school's radar is because it's terrifying. There's no way to sugarcoat this. Just the prevalence of young people getting in touch or getting fentanyl has been enhanced, unfortunately, by the internet and sometimes like some social media sites. But you can arm yourself with the relevant health-based information to hold a discussion with your daughter, they, them, about this potentially hazardous drug. When I was growing up, we didn't have this. We now know, we'll talk about that later, but we now know just how incredibly powerful this narcotic really is. And it definitely is terrifying. So that's why we're here. Again, Eduardo Torres, Prevention Solutions, and you're in the right webinar if you come here to hear about fentanyl. Before we dive right into that, I also want to talk a little bit about some of the inherent risk factors for addiction. So we've identified 3. The first one has a lot to do with something called family history. So we know that if some folks have a genetic predisposition to addiction, meaning that they had people in their family that suffered from addiction and or chemical dependency, their probability of becoming addicted or chemically dependent increases. It doesn't mean that they're going to get addicted, but what it does mean is that their probability is enhanced. Reason being, family history or genetic predisposition to addiction has 3 things going against the individual, meaning that they increase their risk. The first one has a lot to do with something called the dopamine hypersensitivity. So just as a small example of that is, if I have a friend and we both decide to drink the same exact amount of alcohol, the dopamine-based response in my brain would be disproportionately higher than my friend's brain, who probably doesn't have a genetic predisposition to addiction. What that means is that the severity of the craving or wanting to do it again would be much more enhanced in my brain, because every time, the reason why they're called mood-altering substance is because they disrupt homeostasis in the brain, that delicate balance. So every time that happens, the farther out of range one goes out of that natural balance, that homeostatic balance, the higher the craving is going to be, or the bigger the craving is going to be the next day. The second thing has a lot to do with tolerance. So if one has what's considered a genetic predisposition to addiction, and they naturally would have a higher tolerance to alcohol. Tolerance is not a good thing, even though some parents say, but it's better to teach them how to drink or to expose them so that when they grow up, they don't get as drunk as per se the kids that probably were never exposed, but it's quite the opposite. Tolerance is a known risk factor. And especially with the folks that have a genetic predisposition to addiction, we found that they naturally have a higher tolerance to begin with, specifically with alcohol. And the third thing is that of a very specific neuroreceptor in the brain that's called a D2 receptor. So D2 receptors are the receptors in the brain that naturally motivate someone to forego instant gratification for a more delayed gratification further down the road. What we have found, insofar as people that have a genetic predisposition to addiction, is that they naturally are born or have less of these very specific neuroreceptors. So their brains are much more primed to mostly respond to instant forms of gratification versus delayed forms of gratification. So that's imperative to know. If you have a genetic predisposition to addiction in your family, it's critically important that you have a conversation with your teenage children to make them aware of the risks. Again, substituting false perceptions or normative beliefs with evidence-based information can empower individuals to lead healthier lives. Furthermore, we also have the surrounding factor. I can't stress this enough. I was talking to Charlene and Bev right before we started this presentation. And one of the things that I've seen is there's been this percolating just talk about, that's just continuously been percolating about Xanax or Xanax bars in songs, nonchalantly in some movies that people see. That's part of the reason that's driving this fentanyl surge that we're now seeing directly affect young people. Because it normalizes these pretty powerful benzodiazepines or a culture of binge drinking. We also know that with binge drinking, folks are much more likely to engage in other substance use other than marijuana or nicotine. So there's so much prevalence in that normalization of behavior, which further decreases people's perception of risk towards substances. I've had so many kids come up to me throughout the years that whenever there's a song that talks about ecstasy, what about X or what about Molly? Ha ha ha. And I'm like, what do you know about it? Well, I've just read that some people took it because it's like they have this viral thing that kind of like goes everywhere. And then again, when people are exposed to it and when they see a lot of people talking about it, it normalizes. Therefore, it decreases their perception of risk towards the substance. So surroundings are a critical factor to address, to talk to them. Furthermore, social norms are also incredibly prevalent. One of the things that we find at Prevention Solutions, and this is one of the reasons why we have our survey database, which has surveyed about 130,000 students, is that most young kids, when faced with the task of using or not, a big decision that a big factor that influences their decision-making process is their perception of how high use is amongst their peers and their communities. Meaning, I can sit here, I could have probably talked to 20 drug experts. I can probably know just how incredibly risky it is to get to try any sort of mood-altering substance. However, if I believe that a lot more people are doing it, I'm much more likely to conform to that norm. So the perception has to be challenged. We find that, especially in middle school, gross misconceptions of use and underestimation of non-users is a critical factor and is a critical piece that will accurately predict how high use is going to be when they get to high school. So that's a really, really important factor. And then our bread and butter, the age of first use. Delay, delay, delay. Reason being, the adolescent brain is still not yet 100% fully developed. What does that actually mean? You've probably heard this so many times. It means two things. First thing is this is the mid part of the brain, and this is the prefrontal cortex. If you think about it in these terms, the mid part of the brain is the most primitive part of the brain. Its primary purpose is basically to survive. As a human, every bit of sensory-based information that you receive, what you see, what you hear, and what you feel will always be processed through the mid part of the brain. Fortunately, after it goes into the mid part of the brain, it then, I'm talking about an adult here, I'm not talking about a child right now, it then sends that information as quickly and as efficiently as possible to your filter, meaning the most sophisticated part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex and or frontal lobe. This is the part of the brain that filters out the information and should keep this part of the brain in check. Part of the reason why use is so risky during adolescence is because if we think about these neural circuits that basically convey or transmit information between this brain area to this brain area, they're developing. They're undergoing this critical process called synaptic pruning. And furthermore, they're starting to get myelinated. These myelin sheets that basically protect and and insulate these emerging neural circuits and basically aim at achieving interconnectivity as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Part of the problem is when people drink or use any sort of mood-altering substance, particularly during their teenage years, they run the real risk of damaging these connections. When you have faulty wiring that didn't properly develop the way it was intended to, then the mid part of your brain is going to be much more dominant than your prefrontal cortex and your frontal lobe. That's addiction, an inability to control anything that increases levels of dopamine. Trust me, I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I've been sober since I'm 19. I'm 37 now. I can't drink because if I drink or use any sort of mood altering substance, I have no control. Many people have asked me throughout the years, but how do you know that? I mean, come on, like you can just have one drink, you know everything there is to know about the brain, or you seem to know what you're talking about. I try it with sugar. The moment I eat a little bit of sugar, I can't control myself. This is not an exaggeration, but I could probably eat 10,000 calories in one sitting of just sugar and still crave it and still not be able to stop until I have to limit to where I can't eat it. That's life as an addict. But the good news about it is that it's a totally preventable disease. If you delay the use as much as you can, and then people start using whatever alcohol, nicotine, or whatever afterwards, after their brain formally develops, their risk of becoming addicted significantly decreases. So this is what we're out to achieve. We view this issue as a health issue. All right, so now let's go to our topic, which was what is fentanyl? So we're here to talk about fentanyl. I want to give you a backstory to this. One of my best friends from rehab that I went to when I was 19, he was hooked on heroin. And at that point, this was in 2004, the prevalence of fentanyl was very, very, very low. So you would naturally see that there would be a revolving door amongst opioid addicts in my rehabilitation facility. It's very difficult for them to get sober. Today, I spoke with my friend a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. He works at a treatment center out of Phoenix. And he was telling me that with the prevalence of fentanyl and analogs of fentanyl, such as Carfentanil, life on the street, the majority of them, usually when they check out of rehab, they don't survive that long, despite the fact that there are reversal drugs such as like naloxone or Narcan. It's very, very difficult to bring them back. So fentanyl has been around since the 1950s, 1960s. It's a synthetic opioid, and it was usually approved for the treatment of like people that had like severe pain. Talk about people that had cancer, or any sort of like debilitating condition to where like pain management was the only option that they had. Keep in mind that fentanyl, if you even compare it to another powerful opiate, such as morphine, fentanyl is about 50 to 120 times more powerful than morphine. So we're talking about a different animal here, something that, you know, is much, much more powerful. And it's usually much, much more efficient in the medical treatment. Reason being, you could provide a lower dose, and it does a couple of things that I think are really, really important. First and foremost, there's minimum histamine release. So what that means, histamine is basically a hormone, your body rejecting a substance because it views it as a foreign invader. We see that with fentanyl. So sometimes like it doesn't cross the brain-blood barrier as efficiently, or it doesn't take up that much tissue. With fentanyl, it's seamless. Minimum histamine release. You can just give them a little bit. It spikes 30 to 40 minutes. Then you give them another dose, and basically their pain is significantly managed. There are even fentanyl lollipops. We're talking about fentanyl right now from a medical perspective. So It's a really, really efficient drug at handling pain. Part of the problem, however, is that unfortunately, it's very easy and cheap to make. Furthermore, its effects on the body are horrific. We're talking about opioid effects. So from the brain, mental confusion, memory issues, severe respiratory depression. This is usually what kills the majority of people that end up using fentanyl. And if you look at this isn't any different from like what traditional opioids do. Part of the mystery with fentanyl is that we are really unsure at this point still what it actually does to the body. Yes, respiratory distress, significant spike in the glycemic index, mild cognitive inhibitions or inability to basically stay focused or whatnot. We could be talking also about heroin. It doesn't fall out of the realm of what opioids do. But the problem with fentanyl is how powerful it is its ability, like I said, to cross the brain-blood barrier within 1 or 2 minutes. That's a game changer. When we're talking about morphine, when we're talking about heroin, when we're talking about other opiates and or opioids, those take a little bit longer. And there's usually some resistance in the form of histamine. When it comes to fentanyl, there's no resistance. So it's bam, a very, very, very quick effect that it has on the central nervous system. People feel the effects almost immediately. To quantify the damage that it's done, if you look at this figure, this is the national overdose deaths involving heroin by other opioid involvement. So look at the spike in heroin in combination with synthetic opioids. Synthetic opioids are basically fentanyl or carfentanil. 2011, 2012, 2013, it started spiking. Look at 2018 through 2020. And unfortunately, those numbers in 2021, the projection is that they look almost identical. There's been, if anything, they've leveled off, but there has not been a statistical decrease in any of this. Unfortunately, the problem seems to be getting worse. And the reason why I say I'm not an alarmist, we at Prevention Solutions make a point to not be alarmist, but the reason why it's scary enough, and the reason why I'm even talking to you about fentanyl today is because it is now reaching a cohort of the population that's the most vulnerable, which are young people. So this should concern you. This should actually put you on edge to be like, what is it? Well, what does it do? Where are they getting it from? I don't understand. And I hope this in a way shows you just the damage that it's done. We've been talking about the United States being in an opioid epidemic since 2014, 2015. And those numbers, like I said, have unfortunately kept on going. I want to also tell you something, which is also very interesting. If you see 2018 through 2020, deaths decreased. And the reason why they decreased is not because use decreased, not at all. It's usually because they now have an opioid reversal drug that brings people back, which is called Narcan. It's a nose spray that people put, and it seems to counteract some of the effects to where people actually do come back. But I have to warn you that despite the fact that it's a great drug, it's a great harm reduction drug, about 10% of subjects who are actually revived, I think the number is at around 10%, show significant cognitive impairments or cognitive deficiencies after being revived. So this is part of what the media doesn't necessarily talk to you about. What that means is really unknown. We have little data to project, is this permanent? Is this irreversible? Does that mean that they're brain damaged permanently? Like, there's so many things, there's so many variables that we don't know. Furthermore, on the opposite side of the spectrum, I don't necessarily agree with it, but when I was doing my research, there are some people in the medical field that say, well, what Narcan is doing is it's enabling the behavior. People basically use it, would shoot up a little bit more fentanyl, because the more fentanyl you shoot up, the bigger the high it is, expecting or knowing that they're going to be revived. So we're perpetuating the cycle and no one's getting better. You start to see, like, when we get to this point, it's a real problem. But the good news is that it could be totally preventable. But it's always fascinating for me to hear different sides of the argument from medical professionals, people that are in the field. When I was talking to my friend, this is anecdotal now, this is not factual. One of the things that he was saying is like, yeah, they're checking into rehab. They stay in the rehab for like 2 to 3 weeks. They get their tolerance low. We put them on methadone or Suboxone only because what they're trying to do is they have to a decreased sensitivity. They're trying to increase their sensitivity. So if they're 2 to 3 weeks out of it, they go right back out and the high is the best high that they felt. So they're perpetuating the cycle. Many of them, unfortunately, opioid addicts, once they get addicted to these, it's incredibly difficult to bring them back. I can't stress that enough. I'm all for harm reduction, but at the same time, their outcome is very, very dire. It's unfortunate. So wanted to show you this graph to basically help you understand what it is that we're dealing with and how severe this problem is. So a couple of factors that have contributed to the increase of use of fentanyl in the US. So the first one is it's being mixed in with other illicit drugs. Basically, yeah, to increase the potency of the drugs. Furthermore, and unfortunately, with just these bad actors poisoning the well, so to speak, you can now buy it in the form of powder, nasal sprays. And unfortunately, one of the scary things about it is that it's being pressed into pills to make it look like legitimate prescription opioids. Again, we're talking, this is mostly from people that are literally buying it that might have already an addiction to opioids. But part of the problem, and I was telling Charlene and Beth about this, is just how scary this is 2 milliliters, I'm sorry, is literally enough to kill a person. Like they're gone. If you buy a strip of pills that contain fentanyl, there's no regulation or insight into it. One of them can have 0.08. You're fine, probably won't kill you. The other one can have 1.2, stronger high, it still won't kill you. But the other pill right down there can have 4 mgs or mLs, enough to kill you. You die. So there's no oversight. It's basically, it's literally like the Wild West. It's similar to what electronic cigarettes or vapes looked like when they first rolled out, and how predatory the marketing was with these. So again, producing it is not an exact science. 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal depending on a person's body size. Check this out. And this is what's scary about it. 42% of pills tested for fentanyl contained at least 2 milligrams of fentanyl, considered a potentially lethal dose. So what I was saying is you've had, again, I was reading a couple of research pieces about it, and anecdotally, what some users were saying was, we bought a batch, we bought a whole set of pills, and the first 4 or 5, they seem to be going well, but the other one, I overdosed. I had to be revived with Narcan. So you start to see just how incredibly just scary this really is. The other thing about it is, like, this is now considered a weapon of mass destruction, because like literally a kilogram of fentanyl can kill about 500 to 750,000 people. As you have seen, the San Diego Sheriff's Office played, it's on YouTube, where a sheriff deputy came in contact with fentanyl in a car, was exposed to through air when he was reading, or when he was going through the car, and he overdosed, like literally went down, had to be revived. So again, this is definitely a really, really scary drug. Furthermore, there are analogues of fentanyl, such as carfentanil. So if fentanyl is about 50 to 125 times more powerful than morphine, carfentanil is about 500 to 750 times more powerful than fentanyl itself. And since it's so cheap to make, what a lot of these drug trafficking organizations, or the cartels that we're talking about, do is that, on the internet, what they do is like, oh, okay, they say, we can sell you Xanax. You have to understand that the dynamics of opioids, the high that they get is very, very similar to the high that people get with benzodiazepines, anti-anxiety medication, etc. So they buy it, thinking that what they're getting is Xanax bars. They have a different name on the street. And unfortunately, they may have benzodiazepine-like properties, but most likely they're laced with fentanyl or carfentanil. So these people have no idea what they're ingesting or what they're putting into their bodies, which in turn has significantly spiked overdoses across the spectrum. But as it pertains to young people, check this out. This is the impact that it's had on teenagers. So a main factor is that the supply of increasingly deadly drugs, which has driven overdose deaths to more than 100,000 per year, has trickled into what adolescents are using. After staying flat for a decade, we're mostly talking about the impact that fentanyl's had on teens. The overdose death rate among US adolescents nearly doubled from 2019 to 2020, and an alarming rate climb that has continued into 2021. And as I was saying, what teens may think is an opioid painkiller or Xanax diverted from the legal supply is now more likely to be a counterfeit tablet containing fentanyl or similar synthetic opioids. So this is exactly what we're up against. Bev was telling me, and I've heard this anecdotally throughout so many schools across the United States. When I go in, what do you know about fentanyl? It's literally popped up. I was at a school in Los Angeles last week. And they were telling me about a student, an alumni of the school that had literally bought pills on the internet thinking that what he was taking was Xanax. There was another student at that same school who had bought pills thinking that what he was taking was ADHD medication. So medications that are on the opposite sides of the spectrum. But what people don't realize is, like, if you mix ADD or ADHD medication with an opioid, that speedball that you get gets you really, really high. They read about this on TikTok, on all these social media sites. They post like where they could get this. And of course, there's no accountability for that. And they probably get pills that might have amphetamine or methamphetamine-like properties that are probably mixed or combined with fentanyl or carfentanil. So this is what we're talking about. This is the reason why we're talking about this subject. Is my recommendation as a prevention specialist is, if you have sons, daughters, they, thems at home, non-binary gender folks, it's critically important that you're having a conversation with them just about the prevalence of these really, really scary drugs that are out there that can significantly kill someone based on one-time use. That's all it takes. Keep in mind also that, for reasons still not yet fully understood, some people have different explanations for it or whatnot. There have been a couple of incidences, pretty high profile incidences, that made the media. I don't want to sound like an alarmist here, and I don't want to make it seem like it's happening at every turn, but it has happened enough to get garner the media's attention. Is in some cases, there have been incidences where marijuana has been laced with fentanyl. So what's usually happened is, once it's been laced with fentanyl, the person that's usually taking it, mostly a teenager, overdoses on it. So it's across the whole spectrum of drugs. We're not just necessarily talking about pills. This could also be in a powdered form, like I was saying initially, as an aerosol. It could also be in the form of a nose spray. There are many, many ways. And unfortunately, these drug trafficking organizations get much more savvy with it because it's really, really cheap to make. And the profits are about 3,000% for everything that they sell or make. And there's a huge demand for it. Fortunately, in terms of prevention, we have now seen much more enforcement in social media sites, especially the social media sites where young people live, to be able to report the posts or when they're selling something. And we have seen that there has been an attempt by social media sites to basically cut down on these malicious actors that are directly or disproportionately targeting young people. But that's not enough. We need to be having these conversations with our children as a way to show them that these drugs are actually out there, and the way and forms in which they come. It's not anymore like you're going to shoot something up, and it's not a scary drug dealer that's going to sell you a powdered based form. No, mostly comes in the form of pills. under the guise of an anti-anxiety medication. That's where the majority of overdoses amongst young people are actually occurring. Like I said, young people are very well versed when it comes to anti-anxiety medication. So unfortunately, these malicious actors also know that, so they're targeting them through that. It's a lot harder to make a benzodiazepine than it is to make fentanyl or even carfentanil. And since they both create a similar impact, it's just atrocious. I don't have any other words to describe just how criminal and how terrifying it is. So I wanted to bring this to your attention. I wanted to keep this short and sweet. And I don't think I went over my time. I stayed at 36 minutes. So with that, we have come now to your Q&A. This is really an opportunity for you to ask whatever question you have. If there's anything that's on your mind, if there's anything that's unclear, if there's anything you would want me to discuss in depth, I'm more than willing to take questions.
Boy, thank you so much, Eduardo. That was a lot of information in 36 minutes. And parents and attendees and educators, I just want to say, Prevention Solutions really is the gold standard with regard to substance use prevention and education. They are not alarmists. We are not alarmists, but it took me about a decade to find them. But they have some very special people who work there, and they're all folks in long-term recovery. So this is not something we take lightly. We take this kind of education really seriously. And I just want to thank Eduardo for being so honest and straightforward with us tonight. Okay, lots of really good questions coming in, Eduardo. Let's get going.
Okay, got it. I'm reading them. I'll go to the first one. Is it more likely that fentanyl lacing happens in marijuana, pills, Percocet, opioids, injectable, heroin, or cocaine? Thanks. That's a good question. Insofar as fentanyl lacing, when it comes to adolescents, is mostly happening in pills than anything else. And then most likely in marijuana and cocaine. Now, in the general spectrum of drug users that are already addicted to opioids, it's most likely happening in injectable heroin. Absolutely. That's a phenomenal question. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let me clarify this again. Insofar as young people are concerned, they're most likely to encounter fentanyl or carfentanil in the form of pills. Furthermore, following marijuana, like that marijuana can be laced with fentanyl. Given the fact, and keep this in mind, that marijuana laced with fentanyl is incredibly low. So the representation is mostly in the form of pills. What we have heard, especially from the folks that have overdosed that are young people, is that when they overdose, it was usually the first time that they took a pill from a friend and that told them, you're going to feel really good. This will chill you out. This will mellow you out. This is what they're telling us anecdotally. And the friend also had no idea that those pills were laced or contaminated with fentanyl or carfentanil. Thank you. Thank you for that question. That's a phenomenal question. I'm hearing you talk about what happens when you eat sugar. Is that a way we can gauge in our teens if they have a predisposition for addiction or other things? Thank you. That's also a really, really good question. Yes and no is the best way that I could say it. And I know that this is not probably the answer, that it's a multitude of factors. I would definitely say, as a young kid, I was always very, very compulsive when I ate sugar. And I had a harder time with emotional regulation. And basically it was as if my brain was just genetically predisposed to instant forms of gratification versus delayed forms of gratification. If you see your children eating sugar in massive amounts, that's definitely an outlier, because let's face it, all kids love sugar. Then it would be definitely something that to contemplate asking a clinician or going to their pediatrician for a recommendation. The good news about genetic predisposition to addiction is that first and foremost, it's totally preventable insofar as that compulsivity is concerned. Cognitive behavioral therapy at a younger age, even before they get addicted, provides an invaluable resource to reshape some behaviors, or also for people to not necessarily just act on their first intake, but to think about their decision-making process. So that's the hope. Obviously, when I didn't grow up in the United States, I grew up in El Salvador. And when I was growing up, kids at the people at my first kindergarten, the Little People School, I remember this is the name. They told my parents, they're like, he's a little bit compulsive. Maybe you should have him checked out by a psychologist. My parents, they're great parents. They just didn't have the right information. They were like, no, no, no. They even felt offended. We've advanced a lot insofar as mental health knowledge is concerned. So if you see those signs, it's always important to reach out to a mental health professional, and they will definitely guide you with that. So yeah.
Eduardo, can you also comment? You had an important item on one of your slides, which is family history. We know that it's important if you have a history of alcoholism or drug use in the family to let your kids know. Could you comment on that?
Yes. So I'm going to get very much to, I've always said this, the silver lining in my addiction is the fact that my siblings didn't get addicted. And I broke a 3-generational trend, like 3 generations of people that are addicted. Why did my siblings not get addicted? 6 months, I didn't go to rehab in El Salvador. My parents sent me to rehab in the States. After I had been sober for 6 months, they called my parents in, and my siblings as well. Everyone came over. And the therapist looked at my siblings. I'm the oldest of 4. And she was like, I was 19, my siblings were 13, my other one was 10. She was like, do you want to be like that guy? Pointing at me. And both of my siblings were like, no. Okay, in your family, there's addiction. You're at a higher risk. If you delay, you will not turn out like him. I probably shouldn't have said it like that because it did hurt my feelings. But they needed that reminder. Because they had the right information, they made health-based decisions to mitigate their risk of getting addicted. Today, they drink moderately. None of them are alcoholics. Same genetic predisposition, only difference, they were informed, I was not. So that's the huge difference there, is I started drinking when I was 15 and I started smoking when I was 14. Please have that conversation. It's the same conversation that you would be having if there's a genetic predisposition to heart disease in your family, or if there's a genetic predisposition to diabetes in your family. We know that addiction is a disease and it's a totally preventable disease. So.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. All right, lots more questions coming in.
Yes, please discuss vaping. Okay, so please discuss vaping and fentanyl. It's an incredible question. Unfortunately, this is, I would mostly call it wildly anecdotal, but there have been incidences where they're saying that they're mixing fentanyl with vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol, the same ingredients that people use when they vape nicotine, when they use nicotine. Again, I have not seen it, but I've heard from about 4 or 5 different sources that this is already happening. I have no idea what that would do. It's relatively new. What I would tell you is that it would significantly depress the respiratory system almost instantaneously, because that's much more powerful than taking a pill. It's less than injecting it into your bloodstream, but it's terrifying. Again, these are claims that again, we've heard already, but we have not been able to corroborate. We do know that there are nose sprays. I've seen one before that has fentanyl. We also do know that they come in pill formats, but yes, it's on our radar. It's just, we don't have the right information currently to make an assessment of like what it even is or what it does. We're speculating even that it's vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol to enhance, to put fentanyl in it. But yeah. Can you please address short, long-term use of Suboxone and newer preparations for opiate withdrawal and chronic prevention? Absolutely. So initially, when people were getting off of heroin, one of the things that this is a secondary and tertiary based prevention with a cohort of people that unfortunately their life expectancy of shooting up heroin, we're talking about, let's go back to the 1980s, 1990s, was incredibly low. Back then, we didn't have Narcan, the revival or whatnot. So a great harm reduction strategy was actually first tried in Indonesia was let's put them on methadone, which is a watered down version of of heroin per se. You're still going to get the same opioid based effects. You're just not going to die from an overdose. So they started like rolling that out insofar as trying to gauge like crime prevention and whatnot, or if they could become functional members of society. Methadone had a lot of side effects, significant side effects from like stemming from like birth defects to significant cognitive impairments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in came a new generation of methadone, of an opiate alternative, which is Suboxone. That's even a more watered down version of methadone that is not as powerful as methadone, because methadone even sticks to your bone marrow. It's just atrocious. But again, it decreases one's probability of dying within the next year because you would be shooting up heroin. So new treatment models have also been in combination with giving people Suboxone and giving them naloxone, meaning that if they were to choose to use another drug, they would get really, really sick if they're given naloxone. So that seems to be working a lot better. There's a much larger debate of, but are they even functioning members of society? Is that the best that we could do? Could they come off of it entirely? Like I said, once people get addicted to opioids, it's incredibly difficult to bring them back. Those were great questions. Thank you. Thank you to the person that asked. I heard that kids are getting pills off Snapchat and Instagram, thinking that they are getting Xanax or ecstasy, and they are fake. They are actually fentanyl. The kids are not actually overdosing. They're being poisoned. Kids need to know if they do not get the pill from their doctor or pharmacy, they should expect that it is a fake pill. Please spread the word. Amen. Yes. It's exactly what we've been talking about this webinar is that, and you know what? You mentioned it a lot better than I did. It is poisoning. Because I just don't have any other way to describe it. When you're giving these kids like drugs that they perceive, they could get high off of and whatnot, but in reality, it's fentanyl, their probability of dying is very, very much increased. I'm not being, Charlene can tell you, we're not alarmist at Prevention Solutions. It's just that this topic is incredibly alarming. Like it's 2 milligrams. Can you gauge like how much that even is about this? Like it's enough to kill someone. And it's like, again, when you get the pills, like I said, a couple of universities, pretty prominent universities, have tested those pills that they bought online, saying that they were anti-anxiety medication or even that they were ecstasy. And what it's shown is like the amount of fentanyl varies from like 0.02 milligrams to 0.8 to 1.2, upwards to 5 milligrams. Whoever gets the 5 milligrams, they're gone. They're not going to be here anymore.
Well, is it too reactionary for parents to have Narcan in their medicine cabinet?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I don't think so. We're at the point already, Charlene, and again, I don't want to sound as an alarmist, but I think we're at the point already where we just don't know where, like I said, yes, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, they're regulating it. They're being much, much more conscious and enforceful, but can we really trust social media sites to be that? Do you know what I mean? It's to have that big of a responsibility when they're juggling all other things as well. So it's like, I would definitely see it as a huge insurance policy in case something happens, in case they become unresponsive. I do believe in talking to them before, but yes, absolutely.
Okay.
How and where are teens buying fentanyl? Great question. Thank you. Again, mostly through social media sites, mostly from word of mouth. Some kids have also reported that they have heard that on Craigslist, they sell pills, anti-anxiety pills, or all these like supplements that they have different words or codes that basically they know what they are. So yeah.
These are really good questions, everybody. Thank you. how do we prevent college kids from using drugs? Normally they don't listen to their parents.
College kids, it's a great question. Listen, I will say this, whether you realize it or not, you are still a significant influence in their life. And the research tells us that consistently. I've always had senior parents and parents that have kids in college say, yeah, but they don't listen to me. They do. It's just that sometimes you don't believe that they are, but they are. The one thing that's very important is to be very clear of two things when they go to college. The first thing is explain to them that, since they're out there already, like telling them not to do it, it just doesn't really work that well anymore. But offering a helping hand, that if at any point there's something that they would want to talk about, that your door is always open. I think that's the best thing to do. And furthermore, talking to them about the fact that, so today would be a great time to call your college kid and say, there are these, I just heard that the majority of teens that are actually dying from fentanyl, they don't even know that they're taking fentanyl. They really believe that they're taking something else, mostly in the form of a pill. That could be ADD, ADHD medication. That could be Xanax or anti-anxiety medication, or that could even be ecstasy. Did you know that? And probably going to say no. So just any pill that's being sold out there, there's a very high probability that it has fentanyl. That's a great way to start the conversation, mostly also through a third-hand perspective. One of the things that we often tell parents is like, sometimes it's just not convenient to go up to them and say, we need to have a talk about drugs, but rather integrate it and make it seem like it's as organic as possible, so to speak.
So how would you say that? Here's a parent who's asking about her 8th graders. They haven't really had this talk yet about this drug. How would you kind of drop that into a conversation? Just say, I've heard that. What would you say? What would you suggest, Eduardo?
So even regarding all conversations, you could just say that you heard about it from the media. You heard about, one of the things that we have to be critical of is the fact that media literacy is a huge component in all of this. And sometimes when there's a story that's sensationalized, kids assume that to be reality, to be the norm, so to speak. And you can turn that to the table to them as well. Like, for example, I'm all for like, making it a fair game of like, yeah, I've heard that this person from like this university, this very prominent university, bought a pill, is very well educated, not ignorant at all. And he or she, they or them actually thought that they were taking ADHD to stay up all night. And what they really got was fentanyl. Did you know about that? Have you heard about fentanyl? So through kind of like through that third hand perspective. So what that does is that it takes the air out of the room. It just basically, the stress and whatnot, it just kind of like, it just goes out, because you're not talking about me, you, this, that, but rather I've heard about this, while at the same time providing knowledge. And I didn't even know that like the CDC offers a website. Hazelden Betty Ford also offers resources. You want to check those out, or can I send them to you? Like, I think it's important for all of us to be informed.
So those are 2 good sites. Are there any other places you would send kids?
The National Institute of Health also. I know that they're really, really good with keeping track of trends and also monitoring the future. That's also a very valuable resource.
That's a great resource too, monitoring the future. All right, here's a good question, Eduardo. We heard you tonight say delay, delay, delay. What does that really mean? If experimentation will happen at some point with drugs, how long do you hope to delay?
Let me put it like this. People say, there are some neuroscientists that say, well, the teenage brain doesn't develop till people are like between the ages of 35 to 40, and others say 32, and then others say 25. You need these connections to be wired correctly. And that mostly takes place between 14, 16, 17 years old. Now, here's the thing. I have to say, that doesn't mean that the risk is completely avoided, but we're talking about risk mitigation, which is really what prevention is. So if you delay just for a couple of years, and especially during those critical years where if you think about it in this context, people have this assumption that alcohol and drugs kill neurons, but they don't. What kills the majority of neurons is when you become a teenager. At around 12 or 13, the brain starts undergoing that critical process called synaptic pruning, which is basically the degradation of the majority of the brain's neurons. And the neurons that remain become supercharged. they become enhanced with the aim of creating interconnectivity throughout brain regions. That interconnectivity between mid and pre is usually between 14 to 16, 17. So if we delay just those 2 or 3 years, the risk significantly diminishes. Significantly.
Okay. And here again is, and to this parent, I'm so sorry for your loss, who lost a child to drugs. And he said, please, again, differentiate between overdose and poisoning. My son didn't ask for fentanyl. He was deceived and given a drug that he thought was something else. He didn't overdose. He died. He was 17. We are so sorry.
I am so sorry, and you're right. I mean, it's poison. I've lost a couple of good friends to this as well. So as a parent, I'm speechless, but I thank you for your courage to even say this tonight. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I do know that your child's death will not be in vain. I do know that, you know, I really feel for you. So this really speaks to the fact that this is very real, and it's how, yeah.
All right. And this is a question that I think, you know, we're here in Silicon Valley. This is a question that we all, you know, we think about. How does it happen that kids around us who seem to be from well-off families, doing well academically, in sports, so many opportunities, how did they end up addicted?
We have this knowledge, that this misconception that wealth insulates kids from becoming addicted, but it doesn't. According to the Hazelden Betty Ford's socioeconomic status, based on the people that young people's drinking patterns, apparently people whose combined income have a net income over 75,000. This is really not a lot, especially in the area that you all live in. Over 75,000, they tend to outdrink the folks who come from families that make less than 75K a year combined income. So there are a couple of things here, and this is what we tell every cohort that we work with. We mostly work with private, international, and American schools across the globe. So a very similar SES communities, the higher socioeconomic status communities. And one of the things that we consistently find is that kids even have a gross misconception that wealth or privilege protects them or insulates them from addiction. But in many cases, what it does is that it delays their ability of getting help. You can hide it for a lot longer. I have the privilege of serving about 20 communities in Central and South America. Parents send their kids to college in the States. Kid comes back after a year or two, send them to work in the factory. They conceal it, they hide it. Whereas if, you know, so I see the disadvantages there too. Also the pressure that's created of like trying to perform or whatnot, the stress is very real. And sometimes that could actually gravitate towards folks using, so.
All right, and I'm going to give you a minute for a last word, but I do want to read this comment because I think it's really important. From Paul, it says, I have a child going to college in the fall. I'm tempted to send them with Narcan, not because I believe that they'll do drugs, but because others might need it. Not many people know that you can get Narcan from your local pharmacy without an RX. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is that true? Can you comment?
Absolutely. I think that the best way I can describe it is this: harm reduction policies are heavily politicized in every, and just unfortunately they are, but they save lives. They really, really do. I can speak of the fact that many of our kids are being poisoned with this stuff. And obviously when you give them Narcan, you give them a shot at and not dying, you know, not going before their time. So I would absolutely send them. And yes, what many states are doing are they acknowledge that, you know, we can't just avoid the elephant in the room. This is a real this is the epidemic that no one really talks about. It's kind of like the concealed epidemic. Every so often you'll get a show on Netflix or this or that, but this is really costing lives, as you've seen this courageous parent talk about. Just the fact that their child was poisoned by this stuff. So it's very, very real, and it's in our community already. So yes, if you have availability to Narcan, get it. You do not need a prescription. In Philadelphia, in the East Coast, they're rolling out Narcan machines to put in colleges because it's
Really?
real. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Are the schools stocking it?
Bev, I'm sorry, Charlene, I've had about 5 or 10 conversations. This semester, I've had 5 conversations with schools. Last semester, I had another 5. So I've had 10 conversations with schools about fentanyl just this year alone. It's not that they've reported anything happening, but it's that it's in their radars. A tragedy has happened with either an alumni or stuff. So it's here, it's there. And the problem is that our kids think that they would know. This is where the problem is, as you saw in this presentation, is kids think that they would know if it's fentanyl, but they have no idea that it's fentanyl.
All right. Well, listen, we want to be respectful of your time and all of you who came today. I just want to let you have some sort of final thoughts and words, Eduardo, for this very, very involved and brave audience today.
Absolutely. Folks, I want to speak to the parent who lost a child. And you have no idea how I feel for you. For one, I don't know you. I don't know your name. I don't know anything about you, but thank you for having the courage to comment on that and just how real it is. I can only imagine that. I don't even know what to say. I've had a reaction to it, and sometimes I've been doing this for 10 years, and I don't necessarily have a lot of reactions but just thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. It's been a pleasure. It's an honor to talk about these issues with you. Sometimes I'm going to get really vulnerable here because I have to. If not, I'm going to hold this in. I have a lot of survival's guilt about the fact that I didn't, and I put myself in those situations, and then to see someone go before their time being poisoned really, really hurts. So I will honor your child's memory. I promise you that.
Thank you so much, Eduardo, and Prevention Solutions, and to all of you who are with us tonight. You know, I started this program 17 years ago to try to give parents what they needed to know before they even knew they needed it. And I think tonight was a really good representation of that. And it was really brilliant again. So thank you everybody for being with us again. This will be recorded and on our video library, so please do share widely. This is information that everybody really needs to hear. So take care, everybody. Stay well. Talk to your kids. That's your goal. If we were in a theater, I'd be saying that. That's your homework. Go home and tell your kids one thing that you heard tonight, please, everybody. So again, take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Eduardo. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, folks. Good night.